Hi guys, welcome to Get Ready to Move by Peopleizer. In this episode, we'll be talking to Paul. Paul has moved with his family from Canada to Costa Rica. And the episode is interesting because Paul has leveraged the help of Mark. If you recall Mark is in Costa Rica and is helping a lot of foreigners to get into Costa Rica. Enjoy. Hi Paul. Thanks for accepting our invitation to come on Peopleizer to share your move story. That's really nice of you. Um, let's get started on that. So we will cover three parts basically: the pre-move, what happened prior to the move, the context, the move itself with the decision making and how has it been, as well as what we were moving to. When we did the pre-interview, you mentioned to me the key important things for me was to keep my family stable, and I think it's important that we start with that because it kind of defines the whole philosophy of your move.
Oh, I mean, that's everything right there. I mean, you have to start from a baseline. And so one of the things that you have to understand is why would you undertake a move like this? And so very evident to me, and very clear to me was this is for my family. And for all of us, and specifically my daughter, she was a big part of it because as I said to her, I said, me and your mother grew up in a different time that was happening, and I said, I want you to be free. I want you to be able to make your choices. I want you to be free to do what you want to do and not restricted in any way. So this was a very big decision, and it's not to say the decision was easy, but it was fairly simple. It was very clear to us as far as how that was going to play out, and so that's it in a nutshell right there. Yeah.
So basically, when you say it was very clear to you guys, you were aligned. Basically, the three of you, so your wife, your daughter. I think she's 12 years old, something like that.
12 years old. Yeah, I think that put it into. I mean, a lot of people in the last 2.5, 3 years struggled with polarizing views on what was happening in the world. So I consider myself very lucky that my wife. We've always shared same values. I mean, this is very important in a relationship. So it was not the hardest thing in the world. Like I said, it was a difficult choice, but it was very simple. So with my wife, we understood the restrictions that were playing out in our home country of Canada, and how it was affecting our daughter, specifically with friendships, with school, with extracurricular activities. She was heavy into figure skating at the time. And so these things became very heavily restricted, and we didn't like the direction it was going. So that was probably the when I say family, our daughter was first and foremost. We also have two adult boys, but they're in a different age bracket, and so when you get to a certain point in your life, you do have to. We're always going to be parents to our kids, but you have to let them fly at some point. You have to let them be adults, and that's what they are. They're both men in our eyes, and so we shared our views with them. But in our primary care was our daughter, and so that was a very, very easy choice. Yeah.
Okay, so that's interesting because a lot of people are in this type of configuration as well, right? They have kids and they will talk to the kid, and it's not easy sometimes to talk to kids or even a young adult, right? So how did you approach the conversation with your two sons?
Well, we're a pretty transparent family, so we don't try to as the saying goes, sweep things under the rug and just let it hide there.
Okay.
We've raised our kids from very open in how we view the world, from a very holistic and part of nature and experience. Experience is a big learning tool for anybody, and so with that being said, as things changed, our kids knew already. Even our outer family, like my parents, my brothers, my wife's mother, her brother. Everybody kind of knew even our clients, because we're very transparent, they sort of knew our stance on many, many things.
Okay.
And so for that reason, it wasn't difficult to have discussions with people on our views. And then when it came to our daughter, so back then she would have been, I guess, 2020, about 10 years old. And so we didn't have any issues talking with her because we talked to her as.
Sorry, the line was breaking a little bit. You said we talked to her as.
With our daughter, we talked to her like almost like a young adult. That's how we've always done it. And so we were very open with what was happening in the world. Yeah, that way.
Cool. Yeah, the importance of keeping the conversation open so that there's no surprise. Otherwise, if you don't talk and then suddenly you come up with a plan like this, people will be surprised. You may have polarization, arguments within the family. Okay, so the move date, the move was in early this year.
Yeah, we actually left Canada on May 8th of this year.
Yeah, so 2022. Yeah. Okay, cool. So can you take the audience through your context before moving? What was it like? What were you doing?
Yeah, so it started off in a very fluid way, as far as myself and my wife. If you go back to the beginning of the COVID era and the pandemic, we never felt comfortable with what was happening. And when we say we never felt comfortable, we never felt right with what was being told to us and how the approach was being taken as far as closing down, our business. Stopping people from seeing each other. The way I look at it is that we're all adults and we can make our own decisions. And so I felt really uneasy with their approach in the spring of 2020. Okay. I think we all remember where we were and what was happening in no matter where we are in the world. And so, we were running things just as business as usual. We were running our business back in our hometown. Our daughter was progressing in school and in friendships and in her social circle, kind of like what I mentioned briefly earlier. And so all of a sudden, the world stopped. And for me, I will tell you the context of how my brain worked is all of a sudden now I went from working so many hours in our own business to all of a sudden not really working at all, because everything was shut down. And for that reason, I was tired from mentally and physically, just from the hours that I would put in, and the stress of running your own business. And all of a sudden we were shut down. And I remember initially it was like, okay, all right, let's stay home and let's do what we have to do to protect the family in that way, because we didn't really know what was going on. I don't think anybody really did at that point, no matter how awake a person was. And you kind of wanted to see how things would fall. And so at that point, I'm not a guy that just stands still. I like to learn. I like to find out what is happening. And so, you start delving a little deeper, and it's like, why are they not? Okay, so there's this pandemic. Why are we not talking about health and taking care of yourself on a natural way, and eating better and trying to sleep a little bit more and mitigating the stress? Because everybody was stressed at that point. So there was a lot of uneasiness, Julian. And this is what I really want to stress to the people. And I think everybody felt that way. And so that was the first catalyst to this, like, really what's going on here. And then as that progressed, we started doing shifting into reopening things, and that happened all over the world too. And then it was reclosing again. In Canada, we had some of the harshest lockdowns on the planet. Our business was closed down officially 4 times in the course of that duration. So we never felt really good about it. And because of that, when you're on uneasy ground, you want to find stability. And so it was like, okay, we need to start looking for different things. And we saw where, and we kind of mentioned this in our first conversation, you have to look at all things in the scope of what your life is based on. And so health and fitness, family, all these different values, financially too. So it's like, okay, our business is being closed. Are we going to be put into a position of major stress coming out of this? And I didn't like the lockdowns, not for the reason of lack of freedom, but I knew that from an economic standpoint, there was going to be a major cost long term as well. And we're kind of seeing that now. So most of the world is unmasked. Most of the world is shot or not shot as far as that goes. Most of the world is reopened, basically. But you can see there's a lot of trouble right now. We have war. We have and maybe another impending war. Maybe that's going to raise the inflation, the price of goods, the supply chains. So I kind of saw that coming. When I had that time, I kind of said, wait a second here. You know, the governments are printing a lot of money because the economies are closed down. This is going to have a major impact on the world. So it's like, what do we do? You see? So that was like, okay, what do we do? So if you're going to ask that question, you have to start figuring out some answers for it. And so we looked at our primary residence in our home country of Canada, and the market at that point was still very good. It was still going up. And so I said, I don't think this is going to last long. And so I looked at my wife, and we looked at each other, and we did our research, and we looked at, okay, there's a lot of potential here. We put our house on the market. And that was the first step, because if you're going to make a major move in some capacity to find your stability, having some kind of financial backing becomes really important. Otherwise, you're going to hit a lot of roadblocks. And so for that reason, we sold our primary residence. And you got to understand, for most people, that's a big change, because you're kind of taking your largest investment and kind of saying, okay, let's remove ourselves from this and kind of see where things go. And so what we did is our house sold very quickly because the market was very hot at that time. And then the questions were going to be asked, okay, so now with that being said, what are we going to do? And the first things we looked at was, we didn't look outside of Canada at that point. Initially, we looked at Canada. So it's like, okay, where can we go? So we looked at I don't know if you know Canada or if your audience knows Canada. Canada is a very large country.
Yep.
And so we're kind of situated on the center east part of Canada, outside of Toronto. So the major metropolitan area of the country. And so it was like, we didn't like the concept of being in a metropolitan area. So we said, maybe we're going to move out east in the islands. There's beautiful on the Atlantic side. It's beautiful out there. And we said, maybe we'll purchase a property, maybe 2 properties, and for a lot less, and we can have one as a rental property, and we can have one as our primary residence. So that was our initial thought. Okay. And as things progress, you look at Canada. So within all the borders of Canada, this large country, we didn't see any deviation from where we were coming from. The lockdowns, the vision that the politicians that they had. Canada, from East Coast to West Coast and everything in between, was just the same. So then I looked at my wife and I said, well, if we're gonna move from here to there, we're still gonna be on unstable ground, and we're now sticking our finances at this point, and then we're going to be uprooting ourselves from one position to another position, and we're going to find ourselves basically in the same position. So, from writing it on a piece of paper, it seemed pretty easy because the culture change was not going to be a big thing. So it was like, okay, that's a no-brainer. But we just didn't like the direction that Canada was taking, and so that was like, okay, we don't want to do that.
So the key point was basically, okay, if we move to another place in Canada, we might not be able to run any business, right? So is that the thinking?
Well, yeah, that's it. Yeah, and going back to our initial discussion about family, it was like, well, is our daughter going to still be really restricted when it comes to schooling? Is she going to be forced to take certain health protocols that the health departments deem necessary? Is she going to be limited because of our choices and because how we view the world? Is she going to be limited? Because we're so that's the big thing too. It was that going back to our daughter was, are we going to have to? Is it going to be the same in the East Coast to the West Coast to the center of Canada? And so we looked at that and we said, nothing's really different. And it didn't matter who was in power in any of the provinces of Canada. They were taking the same stance, and some a little more harsh than others, but it was just varying degrees of gray, So we didn't really like that. And so going back to our original, why did we do this? was we didn't want our daughter to continue to grow up, and we didn't want to displace her into the same situation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, first things first, you look at option within Canada,
Yeah.
and you realize that's not really an option. So, what's next?
So then from there, it's like, okay, we don't like this. So we start saying, okay, where would we consider living? Because we felt very confident that because the way we carry ourselves, the way we teach people, the way we surround ourselves with certain like-minded people, we feel really confident that no matter where we go in the world, we can get by, and not necessarily just get by, Julian, but we can also thrive. That's the type of outlook we have in ourselves.
Mm.
And so we started saying, okay, the United States is a very disjointed country. Some states being very, very harsh, some states being a little bit more open, but I didn't like the concept of going to the States. And I never really have. I've traveled there extensively. If there's anybody that are American viewers, I think the American people are fantastic. I think they're going to lead the charge on how this potentially changes the world. I really do, because they do have a sense of freedom more so than others. And so that was one option that I never really considered. The next was, okay, Europe. And so we looked at Europe and we said, all right, where would we live? And my wife was saying, oh, I'd love to live in Italy. And so, when you look at Italy, for example, we didn't like, we were wide open on what was happening in the world as far as that goes. And Italy was treated very harshly. And they were like China. They were one of the first to go through the major issues and the major lockdowns and so on, because of the numbers that they were writing and so on. So I didn't really consider that. So then it was like, okay, do we move somewhere south? And I've always had an affinity to Latin America. And so shortly after, things happen for a reason. When you ask for things, I really believe the answers are given to you. Most people don't ask the right questions. They don't even know how to ask the question. And so you can never be given an answer if you're not clear on the question. So shortly after we sold our home, even though we were considering other locations, I came across a post on one of my social media networks, and it was from somebody that you had on your podcast, Mark Savoya, who was helping Canadians move to Costa Rica. And so myself and my wife and my family were very well traveled, both for personal interests, but also for business. So we've traveled a lot in the world, but we had never been to Costa Rica. So that's one of the questions I get, is like, well, you're moving to Costa Rica. Why would you move there? You've never been there before. But this is a different world. You can learn a lot from the platforms that we have available to us. So with that, I started looking at, I didn't reach out to him initially. I started looking at his posts. I started looking at the comments that people were posting, some negative, some positive, because when you reach out to a lot of people and you elevate your platform, there's always going to be haters out there. Yeah. This is the common thread. And so I didn't reach out to him initially. So this is going back into the later fall and early winter of 2021. And we had sold our house. So it's like, okay, what are we going to do? And I started looking at Costa Rica, and I started educating myself a little bit more, and not just the beauty of the country. So, a lot of people go to Costa Rica for holidays. Okay, fantastic. But that's not why we would have moved there. So it's like, can my daughter go to school there? Can she continue educating herself that way? How's the financial system there? What's their history too? You always have to look at the history of a country to understand where a country potentially is going to as well. And so I looked at the history, and I looked at the banking. I looked at the real estate market over there. And so it started checking off a lot of boxes, and the diversification of the ocean, the ecosystem, the jungle, the mountains. These are all things that we're very attracted to. We're very attracted to nature and surrounding ourselves with positivity of nature. And so that also lended to another check mark and saying, well, if we go through a harsh winter, and I'm not foreseeing anything, but the potential is there with the way the world is, with supply chain shutting down, or being very limited, is that going to affect a lot of countries? In Canada, for example, we rely on that because when we go into a harsh winter, we can't necessarily grow our own food unless you have the ability of a greenhouse and you have that ability. So Costa Rica was sort of like, oh my God, walk down the street, you can cut the coconuts, the mangoes, the avocados. We could have our own chicken coop if we decided to. So there was a lot of potential that way. So it checked off another to do, or essential for us. And so because of that, then I said, then it was like I had some more downtime as we went into the holidays of 2021, Christmas, and eventually into the new year. And I sat down and I reached out to somebody that I didn't really know. And I reached out to Mark, who was a fellow Canadian living in Costa Rica. And I reached out to him and he responded back to me right away. I still remember the day. It was this early Sunday morning. My house was very quiet because my boys were not there. My daughter and my wife were still sleeping. And I got up and I reached out to him. I just felt this urge to reach out to him. And he responded back right away. And he responded back with almost every detail on what it takes to move. So I thought, oh, okay, this is very interesting. Now, potentially we have somebody who has experience, is trying to help Canadians. My first thing was like, okay, who is this guy? What's his reason for doing this? But I felt an instinct inside of me and an intuition inside of me that he was authentic in his approach to help people. And so I started delving into the information. Now, fantastic that he provided with me with a base. And so now it was my responsibility. I felt it was my responsibility to start looking into the information that he gave me. And so I took the next few weeks and I started doing that. But when you're invested in something and you believe in something and sort of your cells kind of vibrate toward that, and everything feels right, you put your direction there, your energy there. It didn't take me a lot of time to see, wow, this is actually a very doable move, from all the check marks that we looked into initially. And so I was like, then it was like, okay, I have to now talk to my wife. This is my partner in my business. This is my partner in my life and my family. So it was like, okay, Christine, this is my wife. I said, what do you think? And I presented it to her. And initially,
so you did all that research by yourself, right? Mostly.
Initially, yes. I broached the subject in a very casual way. I said, you know what? Maybe we move south. Maybe we move to Costa Rica. And so, my wife was like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Not maybe explain my timeline that I had in mind. And so with that being said, then we started about a week or two. It was about a couple of weeks after I started saying to my wife, I said, look, this is something I think we should seriously consider. And she was on board with all of this. She actually really was. And so, but then the major question from her would have been like, okay, but what are we going to do? Where are we going to live? How are we going to sustain ourselves? So these are very valid questions and very valid concerns. So, in talking to our who I consider a very close friend and almost a brother in arms, is we talked to Mark, and Mark also is he understands the real estate world down there. So that was our major concern. It's like, okay, what are we going to do? And so he actually presented us with some beautiful properties that fit our budget. And so I showed this to my wife and she started crying, because my wife always had a vision, going back to our early days of our relationship, about living close to a beach potentially, or an ocean. We don't have that in Canada unless you live on the coast. And it's very different than living in a very warm climate too. So this was always a dream, I would say, for her. And so then I said, well, we could be living this dream right away. Okay. And so then it was like, okay, they have international schools for my daughter. They have it's a very different way of living. So it's like, where do we go in Costa Rica? So I looked at, again, Costa Rica is a small country compared to Canada, but it's a very vast country still. Where do you find yourself? And so we looked at I feel that we moved to a southern Pacific region of Costa Rica, the Uvita region. And so we picked this region because we think it's an up and coming region. It's not as established as some of the northern part, but we chose that for that particular reason, because we have to take care of our family on many different levels, one of them being financial as well. And I don't want to keep broaching that, but that's a very important part of making a major move like this. It's a realistic part of it too. And so you want to be able to take care of your hard-earned finances that you've worked for your whole life. And so that's going to help your family in almost every regard. So that was where we went to. We went to a place that was up and coming. It's not the most expensive real estate, nor is it the cheapest, but it's up and coming. And so we chose that reason. We picked a beautiful home. This is where I am currently today. And we're very happy here. So that was, not to get too off topic, but that was, it sounds very simple, but there was a lot of work that Mark made very easy for us because he helped us in the process. He's like, you can do a lot of this yourself, or you can hire. And so I've tried to do things in the past, and I've made mistakes in the past. You want to learn from your mistakes. So sometimes hiring professionals in their field is what you need to do. And so we hired certain lawyers that were experts in making this move. We hired them, we brought them on, we made sure that every T was crossed and every I was dotted. And it didn't take long, it was just a process. But with Mark's help, it was a very clear process, because he had made the move himself and he had helped a lot of people in the process as well. And so because we were very, very committed to our choice, and because we saw what was potentially on the other side of our choice, we were moving and taking the steps necessary. And that's all it is being consistent and disciplined on a daily basis to continue to do things on your approach to your eventual move. And so that's what we spent. It was a long year. So we ended up moving, like I said to you early in this podcast, is we made the move officially on May 8th. But we started the process back in the late summer of 2021. And then it was like putting our house up for sale, getting it ready for sale, doing that, then finding a short-term rental, telling our daughter what was going to happen, what we're going to do with our businesses, starting the process of moving from one country to another country. So it was nonstop work to be done at some point. So mentally, and trying to keep our daughter busy and still keeping a semblance of normality in our life too. It was a lot of mental exertion up to that point, and a lot of stress we were carrying too.
Okay. Well, yeah, Mark, we move a bit of that stress. So if we look at the timeline from the moment you say, okay, well, let's move, and then you move, what was the activity which was the most time consuming? I mean, there was a lot of research on your side, right? I'm assuming there was.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like, I mean, again, people would look at from the outside, they would look in and say, oh, you bought a house, you did some paperwork, and you moved down to Costa Rica. But there's a lot of pressure in doing that. So number one, there's a lot of pressure in having the making the choice and following through with a choice to move in such a tumultuous time. Remember, we didn't know, we were restricted with air travel still. So it was like, are they going to limit that even more? And we had invested a lot in this move. So it was like, are they going to limit us? We didn't know, Julian, when you don't know necessarily what's on the other side, it's a stress that you have to carry constantly. Yeah, of course. But the research and having support from somebody that had already done the move helped a lot. Yeah. And so going back to it again, I felt really confident with it, and I was very clear on my follow through on the choice that we had made. And I say we because I wouldn't have done this move if it wasn't consensual with my wife.
Okay. Okay, it's something we have seen over and over again during the interview. The fact of having someone local, I mean, on the spot that you can trust, that help you to integrate the country, it makes a massive difference between one who has a contact point and the one who just try to arrive and then, oh, let's see how I will integrate myself. Basically, it's
If I
every
if I
time
look at
we've seen you need a contact point.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't imagine so already with the pressure that I talked about and the amount of work that was needed to run around and follow through and all this, I couldn't imagine doing it without giving the proper steps on what to do first, second, third, so on, so on, and so on. So having that, even though that was very stressful and very time consuming and still difficult, I couldn't imagine trying to do that myself. So having that local contact point was just an absolute must. And I talked to people that had made the move prior to us. So many people have made the move after us, and so they share the same sentiment that I do as far as if it wasn't for that support, it would have been almost impossible. Not impossible, but I would say it would have knocked off a high percentage of people from making that kind of a move. Yeah.
Did you consider moving on the east side of Costa Rica? Or
No,
no?
no. So from the research that I did myself,
Yeah.
I looked into it, and the reason I didn't pick we didn't really consider, it wasn't really even a consideration, Julian, and simply because the East Coast compared to the West Coast of Costa Rica, it's not as developed from the infrastructure, even the roads, and so on. So when you look at making a move, a major move on that part, having basic infrastructure in place was really important to us. So we looked at that side very briefly, but it was simple because it didn't really have the things that we needed checked off as far as schools, for international students, roads, and so on.
Okay. Cool. So what were you moving to? So you bought the house before moving?
Yeah, we did. Yeah,
Yeah.
actually, we did. I did. I don't think I touched upon that. So we saw this in talking to our local contact, Mark. We came across this absolutely beautiful property that was within our budget, and it kind of hit a lot of things. And so in our region, in our area where we are, either people are very close to the beach or they're up in the mountain. So it's a very beautiful part, but we chose this property because, again, I would say more for our daughter. Myself and my wife, we could manage anywhere.
Okay.
And so we picked this because it was very central to the center part of our town where we live, and it's easy accessible by the main highway. So talking about the infrastructure becomes very important to get to where you need to go. Even groceries, it was, how are we going to get groceries? How are we going to get internet? How are we going to get all these basic needs and so on? So we picked a very center part. And so it ticked a lot of things. And so we said, I don't think this property is going to last long because real estate in that region of Costa Rica was continuing its ascent up. So back home, where in Canada, where we sold at very close to the top of the market, it was starting to plateau and then eventually start to go down. So in Costa Rica, it wasn't doing that. It was continuing to go up. So me and my wife had a very serious talk, and we said, okay, let's buy the property. And so we used Mark, who was a Canadian, and so for that reason, and our local contact point, and so we used him, and he actually helped facilitate it. He put us into contact with the local lawyers that we needed to, and again, it was pretty seamless. It was pretty seamless that way, but it was a big trust too, because all of a sudden it was a big chunk of money that had to go down to Costa Rica.
Yeah,
Where it's
exactly.
like
You
in the back of your head, you think, can it be a scam? Can it be like, when we get there, is that house going to be under our name, and so on? So anyways, it worked out, and we're very happy here. My daughter loves it. Will this be our forever home in Costa Rica? Who knows? because now that we're here, it makes sense because it's a very safe part of the country. It's a very easy to train to almost any other part of the country. Is we have everything that we would need here very close to us. And again, it goes back to our daughter being very centralized, and so she was very. This became a very important choice because she was going to be able to potentially make friends. And when we talk a little bit more about how when we arrived here, I'll discuss that a little bit more because that helped considerably location. And that again, that was part of Mark's advice too, because you can only do so much research. You have to live it as well afterwards. So having a person down here that would say, this region is cheaper, but it has this downfall. This region is more expensive, but it has this downfall. So you try to find a happy medium, and we feel we did. Now that we're here and we're almost 6 months into our move.
Okay. Can you tell us the name of the town again?
Yeah, so we live in the southern province of the town of Uvita. So yeah,
how big is the town?
I don't know the actual population. Let me give you some scope here and some framework. It's now that we live here, it's you pretty much get to know all the locals. You get very quickly. You get to know all the expats that are here. So is it a big town? By no means is it a big town. But then Costa Rica doesn't really have metropolitan areas except for San Jose, which is about a 3.5 hour drive from where we are in Uvita. But it's a fantastic location from a geographical standpoint too, because literally 5 minutes from my house here, I'm talking about a 5-minute walk, is the beach. So we have the Pacific Ocean right in our backyard, so to speak. And then on the other side of the main highway, you can literally drive up some very big mountains. And so it has this diversification that way that we kind of, again, our family does crave. So it's a very small town, Julian, but the region, I would say, is a little bit bigger because then you have other cities that are not far away. And so, to be honest with you, our daughter goes to school now in a city about 15 minutes away because we felt that was the best school for her. So it's a larger region that's spread out by about a half an hour of driving north to south, I would say. Yeah.
Are you
Uvita being the main as well.
Are you guys happy with the local infrastructure?
The local
infrastructure. What do you find in terms of?
Yes. For the most part, yes. There's always in a big change like this. I mean, in Canada, you can drive anywhere and get almost anything that you need from a consumer standpoint. In where we live here, because it's still an up and coming city, so I foresee Uvita being a very different in 2 to 5 years. It'll expand considerably because so many people are moving to this region every day. But that's also the downfall, and this is one of the things that kind of irritates my wife more than it does me, is that it's not easy to get certain things, like laundry, things for the laundry, basic things that we're sort of used to. It takes a little bit of energy because we would have to drive about an hour to San Isidro, to the local Walmart, let's say, to get certain things that we would need that's not really readily available in Costa Rica. So that's the one part of the infrastructure of the city that it's a common thread with most of the Americans or the Europeans and the Canadians that have moved down here, that live down here right now. It's a very common thread. It's like it's very difficult to get certain things that we have been used to in our life. But outside of that, and the banking too, there's no major banks in Uvita as well. So we do have to travel sometimes. We can get everything that we need here, financially, of course, but sometimes if you have to do some major banking transactions, you would have to drive about an hour. Do I foresee that changing? Of course, because as our area grows, banks come in, more infrastructure comes in. Just around the corner from where we're living right now, a little mini Walmart is going right around the corner from us. It's called the Maxipali, which is owned by Walmart. So that's going to bring more availability to things that we need. Big banks are going to start coming. The more of the major banks that are in Costa Rica are going to start coming in, like the bank that we deal with in Costa Rica now. It's an hour drive away.
Mhm.
Yeah. So for that, those are the things that are problematic sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But in a way, it's a good aspect because you are actually fleeing this infrastructure of control to a certain extent. So you don't want it to come back and follow you where you
Right.
live because from the moment they are creating the infrastructure, they can put in place control again. So
Yeah.
it's a
That's exactly right.
let's take our time.
Right. And so there's that's how I look at it personally. I'm saying that's not a bad thing.
That's
That's
not
actually a good thing because of what we just came from. Because there was already too much control being put onto people, and we didn't really vibrate with that at all. And so, as I say to my family, I'm like, this is not a bad thing at all. That it's difficult to sometimes do because these are the things we want to lean on. We live in a world that we are plugged in some regards,
Mhm.
and so with that being said, you have to give up certain freedoms. I understand that. And so living in Costa Rica, it really felt good to be a little more plugged from all of that,
Yeah.
from what was happening in
Mm.
Canada. Yeah.
Okay, just to close
Everybody
on
kind of leaves you alone here.
yeah. To close on infrastructure, what's the state of energy, stability of energy and telecommunication in your area?
It's to be honest with you, I feel it's very stable. Now, does the power go out here a little bit more than in back home? Absolutely. It's almost common. And again, I've traveled enough in my life that I know how the world is. I don't have this insular view of the world that a lot of people have. You
Mm.
see, so I kind of knew that and I understood that. There'll be days where we don't have water for 3/4 of the day because there's a lot of construction and infrastructure that's being developed here. And so big storms come in here sometimes as well. And so for that reason, power can be out for a day. But I have to say it's not really an issue because it gets resolved very quickly here. I feel
Mhm.
it does. And so for that reason, if we move to maybe that was part of our choice factor was we want to go to a place that's up and coming, but we don't want to go to a place because of our daughter, so to speak, that's not too wild. So we because of our choice, I feel it's helpful for the questions that you have is based on how's the infrastructure. So like I said, do things become a little bit of a nuisance here? There could be days where I don't have the Wi-Fi and I wouldn't be able to do this podcast. And so we have a saying here, it's Costa Rica.
Okay. In term of weather, how did you find the context, the environment? Because it's way more humid than in, I mean, Canada might be wet, cold, but here it's basically hot, humid, right?
Um, so
No?
I grew up over 50 years in Canada, and Canada is an absolute gem when it comes to weather
Okay.
because we have the four seasons. We have the full spectrum. We have the hot summer. We have the cold winter. Maybe it's a little bit too long our winter, and too short our summer. And then in between, we have our spring and fall, which are absolutely beautiful. And so, again, part of our research, we looked at, we're coming during the rainy season. And so April is the beginning of the rainy season. And so when you look at when we arrived, discussion, we came at the beginning of May. It wasn't really an issue. Like we haven't even seen really a beautiful sunset because the weather kind of every day that we've been here almost, the rain comes in the afternoon. So we haven't really even get to see a sunset. One of the biggest changes that we've had, so the rain didn't really bother us. And to be honest with you, at the time of this podcast I'm doing, it's actually the rainiest season. October tends to be the rainiest season, but we're going into the summer next. So it's going to get a lot hotter, but it's going to get a lot less rain as we transition into December
Yeah.
and eventually through the summer here. So it's going to get really interesting. I haven't lived that yet. We've only lived during the rainy season, so to speak.
Mm.
But one of the things, what was it? I was gonna mention something. The one thing that we saw the biggest difference here is that it gets very dark very early here. So by 6 o'clock in the evening, it's dark. Now, are we used to that in Canada? Of course, because in our winter times, sometimes 5:30, 5 o'clock, even 4:30, it starts to get dark in the
Mm.
depth of the winter season. But in the summer season, we could go sometimes 9:30 in the evening and it's still light outside.
Yeah.
You see, that's part of the big variance that you get in Canada. So
Mm.
here it's been a constant. So that was actually a big change, especially for my wife. I like to go to bed early. I like to wake up early. So Costa Rica fits me really well. But for my wife, she's not so much a morning person. She's a night
Mm.
owl. And so she's like, it's so dark, so early, So that was a big change for her.
Yeah, I experienced both as well, living in Asia, and you get used to it. You eat earlier, but you also wake up earlier as well. The sun is
Right,
rising very
right.
early, and it's
Yeah.
an habit to take. It's actually a good thing to start early your days. Yeah.
From a health perspective, yes, of course. From the rhythms of the day, yes, it absolutely is. And so for me, that fits me really well. But my wife still has to get used to it. She
So
hasn't yet.
let's talk a bit about the integration for your daughter. How was it making
Well,
new friends? And
yeah,
it's very different for her.
yeah, absolutely. And so we knew this coming in. So I started to prepare. I started to prepare my daughter for this move before we even got on the plane to come down here. And I said to her, I said, it's going to be very difficult in the first days, in the first weeks, and specifically in the first month. But one thing I said to her is, as I said, it's only going to get better and better and better, because when you get used to your surroundings, it's of course you become used to something, even whether it's good or bad. Unfortunately, you can get used to something. And so I kind of put that into her mind right away and said, it's going to be rough at the beginning. And so one thing that I found is that that we did different than a lot of expats is that I found a lot of the expats stayed together too much almost, and they didn't venture out. And so one thing that me and my wife committed to right away was like, okay, we really have to integrate our daughter right away. So our social life revolved around um, having her come with us all over the place. So then as you arrive, you start getting used to the immediate area. Okay, what's our street like? What's our little area here, kind of around the block? What's it like? Who are the people like? So we started meeting the people there. And then we started venturing a little bit further. So we started driving around Uvita and seeing what it was like. And then you start to talk to people, both the locals and the expats. And so our world started getting a little bigger and a little bigger. I use the analogy of a child. When a baby is first born, they know
Mm.
only their room, so to speak, and then they start to open up. Their house becomes a little bit bigger, and they venture into the different rooms by themselves, and then they venture into their backyard and their front yard, and then they venture down their street, and then around their block. And so it was sort of the same concept that we did, and we started to meet people, and people that had kids. It was very important to us to socialize with them, and you learn a lot. You don't jive with everybody right off the bat, and so my daughter was like, she's very adventurous, like both myself and my wife, and so and she's very easy to make friends. She's not an introvert that way, where she's going to be in the house all the time. So we found that we were really pushing ourselves. We pushed ourselves. We made it a challenge to ourselves, Julian, and we really pushed ourselves to be out every day doing something in some kind of social capacity that was going to get us to meet people and really open our world as far as networking to people. And some of the people that we met initially, we still talk to today, and some of them we do not.
Mm.
Again, comes back to shared values and so on and so forth. But it became very important. So now, if you fast forward to where we are 5.5 months after our move, our daughter has so many friends, Julian. And we changed her school a few times too, because we found that what we thought might work didn't work out. And where she is right now, she loves going to school. She loves going to school. That was never happening in Canada for us. That
Okay,
was
so
never.
mm.
And so Yeah, surfing lessons, being at the beach, these are things that we moved her into. Soccer, she went into the soccer team right away. She never played soccer before, so these are all things that we kind of moved her to do, and she was open to it. That was a part of it too. She was open to it.
That's good to have this mindset. So why some of the school didn't work out?
Well, false advertising, so to speak. So one of the schools, I'm not going to mention it, but one of the schools that we initially chose, they put her into a classroom. Pretty much 80% of them are expats. So it was sort of a private school. So we put her into that school. Um, the main reason was because of the friends that she had in her circle to that point. A lot of them were going to that school. So we picked that school because she felt somewhat good about it. But what we didn't like, Julian, was that school to us should be a little bit more encompassing. It shouldn't just be sitting at a computer or looking at a teacher. There should be physical aspects to it. There should be social aspects to it. And so when she went on her first day, they sat her down, they logged her into a computer and kind of left her on her own. It was kind of like a virtual schooling. And so me and my wife questioned that and said, well, we could do that at home. We could homeschool her. And so we didn't want that. We wanted her to have so much more. And so we took her out, and we didn't initially put her into school right away. We kept educating her at home. My wife took charge of that. And eventually, from another Canadian family, they mentioned this academy that was about 15 minutes away in the city south of us. And we went to go look at it, and we felt really comfortable with it right away. And so we had our daughter trial a day. They were open to that, go for the day and experience the kids and the teachers and the concept. And so for that, we've never looked back. It worked out. One was a thumbs down, that initial one, and the other one was a thumbs up. And we are now our social scene and our network is based around the school that our daughter goes to, so to speak. Yeah, she's at dances all the time. She has friends that they go do extracurricular activities outside of the school together. It's fantastic.
That's excellent. Taking the time to make the best choice, having this trial, it's very important. We don't think about it. Sometimes we just arrive there. Okay, let's get the kid to integrate the
Yeah,
school as fast as we can because we
yeah.
don't want her to miss school or whatsoever. But it's not the right strategy.
It's not the right. And so if you actually look, when we actually did the original school too, the one that didn't work out, we didn't do that until about, I'm going to say maybe 2.5 months after we arrived. We didn't want to throw that onto her at all. So we the three of us sort of stayed together quite a bit and did our social excursions together. Again, to really become a little more familiar with our new environment, our new city, our new region,
Yeah.
our new culture. And then I wanted her to feel like we're just dumping her into a school for the sake of having her do what she needed to do. So it was the thing to do. That was just like a check to say, okay, she's in school now, all good. Doesn't matter if it's good or bad, she's in school. And so we didn't rush to put her in right away. And so, but when we did, it was still a mistake because we didn't like their approach to it, and for this reason, it like all failures. If you don't learn from them, they're experiences to learn from, and it just shows you what it teaches you a little bit more of what actually you do want or what you do need. Sometimes want and need are two different things. Sometimes, yeah.
So we are approaching the top of the hour, but let's spend a bit of time on you, and especially so you had your own business in Canada. I'm assuming you like working, you like to have an activity.
Love it.
What do you do? How do you integrate yourself?
Yeah.
Professional perspective.
I've always been very passionate about what I do. I'm very passionate about health, fitness, and holistic wellness. So I made a business out of that. And then I've always been interested in mountain climbing. So I made a business out of that as well. I've developed into a professional mountain guide. And so all of our businesses are based on things that we're very passionate about. Okay. Or what I'm passionate. And so to be honest with you, the mountain climbing business, well, that's easy because I can operate that from anywhere in the world. it doesn't really have an issue. Now, was that affected during all the COVID lockdowns? Of course it was, because people didn't travel during those years. And so then the big thing was, and I kind of touched upon that at the beginning of our interview, was, when the first lockdown happened, I was working every day in our business. We had our gym, we had a fitness facility in our hometown, and I was integrated in that all the time. And so that's when you're able to step back. And now we went through the initial lockdowns and the reopenings, and we dealt with all of that, and I worked with our clients to keep them busy even when we were officially shut down. And I still unofficially opened our business many, many times because I never felt that they were justified in saying to me, you have to shut down, especially with what I was doing. And I was there for people that needed support mentally and physically, because everybody was going through hard times. A lot of people were. And so I unofficially opened our facility up. I'm going to say 90% of during all our lockdowns in Canada. And I'm happy to say that because I felt it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, exactly. I fully agree. Especially if you love gym.
Right. And so, fast forwarding to April, about a month before, it's like, what do I do with our community? And so we ended up selling it to somebody who it worked out really well. And again, just part of the reason of timing and how things work out, we sold it to a person that we felt was going to be a good carrier. And we felt good about that. And so good. Okay, we sold the business. That was our brick and mortar business. But what we had developed in even just pre-COVID, before the lockdowns manifested and so on, we actually started developing an online presence. And so I still work today. I don't work as much as I used to. I try to work a little smarter. You learn from the lessons of the hardships that you had back in running any type of business. And so for that reason, I still help people online because I can still Zoom with them. I can still consult with them. And so what do I do to answer your question in a long-winded way? I'm still busy. But I'm taking care of myself a little bit more personally. I swim. I surf 2 to 3 times a week myself, sometimes with my daughter and sometimes with my wife. And the big part of it, me and my wife would actually agree on this, is that a big part of our time is still keeping our daughter busy. So driving her to school is a wonderful thing to do. Picking her up from school is a wonderful thing to do. Driving her to certain social events, to soccer games, to surfing lessons, to so on and so forth. That's actually a big part of our time as well, is keeping her busy as well.
Perfect. So you easily see yourself there for the next 5 years, I guess.
We're going to take it a year by year. But as I told you in our first meeting, when we first met each other, I said, personally, you asked me about me personally. I actually really love it here. I love I love so much about it. I love the being integrated with nature. I love how it's a lot more peaceful here. I'll be honest with you, Julian. My conversations with people are a lot more like-minded than I've ever had in Canada. As far as people that are down here are, even if they've made different choices than we had, they're absolutely not judgmental in any way toward the way that we would choose to. And it was like in Canada. And I'm talking friends, family, clients, the whole 9 yards. Yeah. So that's been a big positive, is I've been more social personally as well.
Awesome. Okay, I think we've covered almost everything, right? Do you think I'm forgetting anything?
It's not an easy transition. I mean, just leave it like that. It was never really an easy transition at all.
Of course not.
But with support, which everybody needs at some point, it was actually a lot easier than I thought. If I can look back now on it, it was not as difficult as I thought it was going to be. And I'm an adaptable person, and I think my family is as well. And so we we call this place home now. My wife actually traveled back to Canada for a couple of weeks back in August, and all she could say while she was in Canada, she was there for maybe 16 days, just doing a few things, seeing some family, bringing some other things that we left behind that we weren't able to take initially. And every day that I talked to her while she was in Canada, she was like, I can't wait to get home. And home indicating where we are here in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Any last word for the audience? How they should approach their move, the mindset?
Well, if anybody's considering it, a local point of contact is a major thing. And also, when you understand why you're doing it, it makes everything a lot easier. It's just you have to understand why you're doing something. Myself and my wife, we were clear on why we were doing this, and so no matter what obstacle came, because you're going to always encounter obstacles. So whatever, no matter what obstacle we were faced in front on that particular day, pre-move, during the move, and even after our move, still is when you understand why you're doing something, it makes it very clear, and you're like, okay, I need to overcome this because of my why. So the first thing is you need to understand is you have to understand your why, and then that's everything else falls into place, I believe. Yeah.
Okay, awesome, Paul. Thank you so much for your time, and wishing you good time there with the family and further integration inside Costa Rica.
Yeah, Julian, really nice to talk with you and really nice to meet you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. I hope the session was useful. So that's 2 podcasts we have around Costa Rica, and I guess it's already quite a bit of information about that place. If you feel you need additional information, feel free to contact Mark or just send us a message through peopleizer.org, the website, or send us a message on Telegram at @peopleizer. Thank you.